Mike, I got some guys here, he said, his voice low, almost trembling. They're saying they're with the HOA, and they're threatening me with fines and all kinds of violations. I don't know what to do. I was immediately on alert. I had never heard of an HOA around here. No one I knew had ever mentioned anything about it. And knowing Paul, he kept his property in top shape. There was no way he was in violation of anything. Where are they now? I asked, my mind already racing. Still here. They won't leave until they inspect my property, Paul replied. They say they have authority to fine me if I don't comply. I could hear the stress in his voice. These guys were clearly pushing him around, and he didn't know how to handle it. Hang tight, I said. I'm coming over. Don't talk to them anymore until I get there. I hung up the phone and grabbed my jacket. My Navy SEAL instincts kicked in immediately. This wasn't just about some HOA fines. It was about someone trying to push around a good person, and I wasn't going to let that happen. Whoever these men were, they weren't getting away with this on my watch. As I pulled into Paul's driveway, I saw them, 2 men standing by the front gate, both dressed in tactical gear, clipboards in hand, and a sense of authority that didn't match their lack of actual credentials. They weren't wearing any police uniforms or anything official. Just a bunch of tactical vests and serious expressions. I could immediately tell they were trying to project some false sense of power. Paul was standing on the porch, his arms crossed defensively, looking frustrated and confused. I could see him glancing nervously at the men every few seconds. I parked my truck and stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel as I walked over. The moment they saw me, the 2 men straightened up, like they thought their intimidation game would somehow improve with the added presence of another person. Clipboard guy, the older one, took a step forward and gave me a tight smile. Can I help you, sir? He asked, his tone pretending to be friendly, but with a sharp edge underneath. I'm Mike Callahan. I'm Paul's neighbor. What's going on here? I asked, keeping my voice calm but firm. We're here on behalf of the Greater Simmons Valley HOA, he said, flashing a sheet of paper that looked like a list of violations. We've been sent to inspect the property. There are a few concerns about some livestock and the fencing here. If the property owner doesn't comply with the HOA regulations, we have to issue fines and possible enforcement actions. I raised an eyebrow. I've lived here my whole life, and I've never heard of a Greater Simmons Valley HOA. What regulations are you talking about? Clipboard guy's smile flickered for a second, but he recovered quickly. We're just doing our job, sir. You can take it up with the HOA if you have any concerns. But right now, we need to perform the inspection. Paul was starting to look more uncomfortable, his hands fidgeting in his pockets. It was clear they were pressuring him, trying to make him feel like there was no way out. I took a step closer, my tone turning more assertive. You're not stepping foot on this property without proper documentation or a warrant. You can't just show up and start threatening fines for imaginary violations. The younger enforcer, standing off to the side, shifted on his feet, looking uncomfortable. The clipboard guy, however, didn't back down. We have the authority to inspect under the HOA's emergency regulations, he said, trying to push past my resistance. If you refuse to cooperate, we will have no choice but to escalate this. I gave him a long, steady stare. If you try anything, I'll call the sheriff. And if you even think about stepping onto this land without permission, I'll make sure you're arrested for trespassing. There was a brief silence as the 2 men exchanged glances. I could tell they hadn't expected anyone to challenge them. The clipboard guy opened his mouth to speak again, but I cut him off. Get off my neighbor's property and don't come back unless you have legal paperwork to back up your claims. They hesitated, unsure how to respond. After a tense moment, they turned and walked back to their unmarked vehicles without another word. As the 2 men drove off, Paul let out a long breath, his shoulders visibly relaxing. He walked up to me, his face still lined with stress. Mike, I didn't know what to do, he said, his voice shaky. They were making it sound like I had no choice. They kept talking about fines and inspections and all these rules I'd never heard of. I was getting scared. I thought they were going to come back and make good on their threats. I could see how rattled he was. These fake enforcers had done their job. They'd shaken Paul up, trying to get him to comply with nothing but intimidation tactics. But that wasn't how things were going to go down. They won't be back, I said firmly. Not unless they're stupid enough to break the law. They're not some official, Paul. They're just 2 guys with a clipboard trying to scam you. But we're not going to let that happen. Paul nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. I don't know how they even found out about me. Everything's been fine here for years. How do they even have the power to come in and threaten me like that? I don't think they have any real power, I said, glancing back down the road where the fake enforcers had driven off. I'm going to make some calls and find out who's behind this. If they're trying to intimidate you, I'm going to make sure they're exposed. Don't worry. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, dialing the sheriff's department. I knew I had to get ahead of this before it escalated further. As soon as the call went through, I briefed Deputy Ramirez about what had happened. I explained how the two men had shown up, tried to force Paul into complying with illegal demands, and threatened him with fines and property inspections that weren't backed by any legitimate authority. Mike, I'll head over to Paul's place in a minute, Ramirez said, his voice calm but with an undertone of urgency. This is exactly the kind of thing we need to nip in the bud. I'll make sure they're off your neighbor's property and get to the bottom of this HOA scam. I'll also make sure you have everything you need in case they try again. I hung up, my mind already working on the next step. I needed to make sure Paul didn't feel helpless again. I've been through tough situations before. This was just another one to handle. Listen, Paul, I said as I turned back to him. I want to get to the bottom of this. These guys are nothing but a scam, and I'm not going to let them bully you or anyone else. Paul gave a small, grateful smile. Thanks, Mike. I don't know what I would have done without you. I gave him a reassuring nod. Don't worry. This ends today. It didn't take long for Deputy Ramirez to arrive. As his cruiser rolled up the driveway, I could feel a sense of relief wash over me. This was the real deal, and it was exactly what we needed to put an end to this. Paul was still standing on his porch, watching nervously, but I could tell he felt better knowing law enforcement was on the way. Ramirez got out of his cruiser with that same calm authority I'd come to appreciate over the years. He'd been around long enough to know how to handle situations like this, people trying to pull fast ones on law-abiding citizens. I walked over to him, quickly filling him in on the details again. They came in, said they were from the Greater Simmons Valley HO. I told him. No real documentation, no legal standing, just threats about livestock violations and fines. Tried to intimidate Paul into letting them inspect the property, but I told them they weren't welcome without real papers. They took off, but I'm not letting this go. They're trying to run a scam. Ramirez nodded, his jaw tightening. I can tell by the way you're talking this isn't their first time pulling this kind of stunt. He looked over at Paul, who was standing a little straighter now that Ramirez was here. Don't worry, Paul. We're going to take care of this. Ramirez turned toward the road where the fake enforcers had left, his eyes narrowing as he took in the details. I'll make a few calls, check in with the local zoning office, and make sure we can get hold of these guys. They'll know they've been caught, and we'll make sure they don't do this again. Let's start with getting their plates and looking into their vehicles. With that, Ramirez walked back to his cruiser, quickly pulling out a notepad and starting to jot down the information I had provided. I could see him already shifting into investigative mode, his mind working over the angles. He wasn't going to let these guys slide, and that gave me confidence that we were on the right track. As I stood next to Paul, I could feel the tension begin to ease. It wasn't just about protecting him now. It was about stopping these con artists from targeting anyone else. I could see Paul's shoulders relax as the sheriff's department took control. You don't have to worry about them anymore, Paul, I said, my voice calm. We're going to make sure this gets handled properly. Paul nodded, looking relieved. I don't know how I'd deal with this without you, Mike. I was about ready to just give in. I shook my head. You don't give in to bullies. You stand up, and you make sure they know they can't mess with you. And that's exactly what we're going to do. While Deputy Ramirez made calls and worked on gathering information, I decided to take matters into my own hands and track down the two fake enforcers. It didn't sit right with me that they had been allowed to walk off without any consequences, especially after the way they had tried to bully Paul. I needed to know who they were working for, who was behind this, and make sure they knew there would be repercussions for what they had done. I grabbed my phone and started going over the details I had already collected, the vehicle's license plates, the description of their uniforms, and the phony badges they had shown. I also made a mental note of the suspicious Greater Simmons Valley HOA they had claimed to represent, knowing full well that I'd already done enough digging to prove it was a fabricated operation. Within an hour, I tracked down the vehicles to a warehouse a few miles away on the edge of town. It wasn't an area I recognized, but it was a place that reeked of illegitimacy, run down, hidden behind trees, and barely visible from the main road. If this was where they were operating out of, it was exactly the kind of place a scam like this would run from. I pulled into the lot, making sure I parked far enough away not to be spotted immediately. I watched the building for a while, then noticed two men walking out of the side door. One of them looked like the clipboard guy, and the other was the younger enforcer, the one who had been nervous when we confronted them earlier. They were talking quietly, walking toward a car with a fake HOA logo slapped on the side. I knew this was my moment. I couldn't let them get away with this. As they approached their car, I stepped out of my truck, walking toward them with purpose. When they saw me, their faces went from casual to immediately guarded. The clipboard guy tried to put on a tough front, but it was clear he recognized me from the encounter earlier. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, trying to sound tough. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I took a step closer, staying calm but firm. "I think we need to have a little talk about what happened back at Paul's house. You've been harassing my neighbor and trying to intimidate him into compliance with a scam. You're not law enforcement, and you're not welcome in this town anymore." The younger enforcer tried to look intimidating, but I could tell he was shaking. The clipboard guy looked like he was considering how to spin things, but I wasn't going to let him play games. "I'm going to give you one chance to tell me who you're really working for and why you thought you could get away with this," I continued. "You're going to explain everything, or I'm calling the sheriff and making sure they know exactly what you've been up to." There was a long silence as the two men looked at each other. The clipboard guy hesitated, then spoke. "You don't understand," he muttered. "This was never supposed to go this far. We were just following orders." I raised an eyebrow. "Orders from who?" He swallowed hard. "Karen Whitaker. She's behind all of it. We were just hired to enforce her fake HOA rules. She's been pulling the strings from the beginning." At that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. These guys were the pawns in a much bigger scam, and Karen Whitaker was the mastermind. It was time to end this once and for all. Now that I had the name of the person behind the scam, I knew I had to act fast. Karen Whitaker was clearly the key to everything, and if these fake enforcers were willing to throw her under the bus, I knew she had been pulling the strings for far longer than anyone realized. I didn't hesitate. I immediately pulled out my phone and dialed Deputy Ramirez, my mind racing as I shared everything I had learned. The pieces were starting to fall into place. I needed to make sure we got ahead of this before Karen Whitaker could make her next move. "Ramirez, it's Mike," I said as soon as he picked up. "I found out who's behind this whole fake HOA scam. The two guys I confronted, well, they admitted it. It's Karen Whitaker. She's the one running this operation. She's been sending these enforcers to harass people, threaten livestock, and extort fines. We need to shut this down before it escalates further." I could hear Ramirez's calm but urgent tone on the other end of the line. "Got it, Mike. I'll get a team together and head over there now. We've got enough to move forward, and I'll make sure to get a warrant to search the place where they're operating from. If she's running this whole scam, we're going to expose her." "Good," I said, a sense of relief starting to wash over me. "And don't let them get away. These guys are serious. They're not backing down easily." "I know. Don't worry, we're on it. Stay put and keep an eye on them, but don't engage unless it's necessary. I'll be there as soon as I can." After hanging up, I turned back to the two enforcers. The clipboard guy looked more nervous than before, the reality of the situation sinking in. The younger enforcer, still visibly shaking, glanced at me like he wasn't sure what would happen next. It was clear that they were in over their heads, and they knew it. "We didn't mean for things to get this bad," the clipboard guy muttered. "Karen promised us we'd be paid well, just to get people to cooperate with her. We were just following her orders." I took a step closer to them. "And now you're both facing serious charges. But if you help us take her down, you might get a lighter sentence. The sheriff's department's on their way, and they'll be handling things from here. Don't try to run." They didn't speak after that, just stood there quietly, knowing they had no more excuses left. I made sure to take a few photos of them and their vehicle, evidence in case anything went wrong. But as the minutes ticked by, I could feel a sense of justice starting to settle in. These two were going to be held accountable, and the scam they were part of would be exposed for what it really was. It didn't take long before the sound of sirens cut through the still afternoon air. A few moments later, the familiar blue and red lights flashed in the distance. Deputy Ramirez and a couple of his team members pulled up, their cruisers coming to a halt just behind my truck. Ramirez stepped out of his vehicle, his eyes immediately scanning the situation. He took a quick glance at the two fake enforcers, who were now standing quietly, their hands on the hoods of the cars like they'd already accepted their fate. "Mike," Ramirez called as he approached, his tone calm but purposeful. "You get everything sorted?" I nodded. "Yeah, I got them to spill. It's Karen Whitaker. She's the one behind the whole scam. These guys are just pawns." Ramirez glanced at the two enforcers, then back to me. "We'll take it from here." "Good work, Mike. I'll make sure we've got everything on record, and we'll start taking action against Whitaker. You did the right thing coming to us." He turned to the younger enforcer, who was standing with his head hung low. "What's your name?" "David." "David Walker," the younger enforcer muttered, his voice almost apologetic. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. We were just trying to get paid, didn't realize what we were part of." Ramirez nodded, already pulling out his notebook. "Yeah, well, you'll have plenty of time to explain all that. And if you help us take down Whitaker, maybe it'll help with your charges. But right now, you're both under arrest for impersonating law enforcement and attempting to extort property owners." The two men were cuffed and led toward the patrol car without much resistance. They were finally realizing the gravity of the situation, and it seemed like the weight of their actions was hitting them hard. No more tough talk, no more bravado. They were just two guys who had tried to pull off a scam and got caught. As Ramirez called for backup to escort the enforcers to the station, he turned to me. "You did good, Mike. We've got everything we need. Now we can go after Whitaker and shut this whole thing down." I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. The fake HOA scam was crumbling, and with real law enforcement behind it, Karen Whitaker wouldn't be able to get away with it much longer. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The sheriff's department was on their way to raid the warehouse I had found earlier, and we were about to find out just how deep Whitaker's operation ran. As the two enforcers were driven away, I took a moment to let it all sink in. The situation had escalated quickly from a simple harassment of a neighbor to uncovering a fraudulent operation, and now it was all starting to unravel. With Deputy Ramirez and his team handling the arrests, I knew things were about to get real. Ramirez came over to where I was standing, glancing over the notes in his hand. "Mike, we've got enough to bring down the whole operation. These two won't be the last to face charges. I just spoke to the county office, and we found several reports of similar incidents from people in other areas. It's clear now, Karen Whitaker has been running a scam for years." I felt a rush of vindication. The pieces were finally coming together, and the truth was out. These enforcers weren't the only ones involved. They were just a small part of a much larger scheme that had been affecting several communities. Ramirez continued, "We're going to hit her operation hard. I'm coordinating with the district attorney's office to file charges for fraud, conspiracy, and impersonating law enforcement. We'll also be issuing warrants for her arrest." I nodded, my mind racing. I had no doubt that Karen Whitaker was behind it all. She had tried to scare people like Paul into compliance, using threats and intimidation to extort money from unsuspecting property owners. It was clear she had been running this operation for far too long, but now that we had exposed it, there was no way she'd escape justice. "Let's make sure we bring everything down on her," I said firmly. "No one else should have to go through what Paul and these other people did." As Ramirez spoke with his team, I took a quick look over at Paul, who was now standing beside his porch, watching everything unfold. He looked more at ease now, knowing that the threat to his home and his property had been neutralized. But I could see the lingering concern in his eyes. It wasn't just about today. It was about all the people who had been tricked by Whitaker's scam, all the property owners she had threatened, all the livelihoods she had tried to ruin. "I'll make sure she doesn't get away with it, Mike," Ramirez said, reading my thoughts. "We got a lot of people coming forward now that they know we're serious. It's all going to come down hard on her." The team loaded up the last of the evidence into the cruisers, and I knew it wouldn't be long before Karen Whitaker's scam was fully exposed. This wasn't just a win for Paul or for me. It was a win for the entire community that had been terrorized by a con artist masquerading as an HOA leader. As the sheriff's department moved to secure the scene and finish processing the fake enforcers, I watched as the realization hit them. The younger enforcer, David, was the first to crack. He'd been quiet for most of the ride over, but now I could see his shoulders slump as he sat in the back of the patrol car. His partner, the clipboard guy, was still trying to save face, but it was obvious he was unraveling. David's eyes shifted toward me as I stood off to the side, watching the whole thing unfold. Look, man, he called out from the back of the cruiser, his voice laced with regret. I didn't want any of this. We were just following orders. Clipboard guy gave him a sharp look, like he was trying to keep him quiet, but it was too late. David was clearly done with the whole operation, and the weight of what he had done was clearly sinking in. Following orders? I asked, walking toward the patrol car. From Karen Whitaker, I assume. David nodded, a nervous twitch in his hands. Yeah, she said we'd get paid, just help her with the inspections and fines. She made it sound legit. I didn't know it was all a scam. I didn't know we were putting people through this. I looked at him carefully. There was fear in his eyes, but I wasn't sure how much of it was fear of getting caught and how much of it was guilt. Either way, the damage had already been done. These guys had been part of something much bigger than they realized, and now they were going to face the consequences. We were told we had to push people to comply or face penalties. The clipboard guy finally muttered, his voice quiet and shaky. We didn't think it would get this far. We didn't think we'd get caught. I could see the fear in their eyes now. But it wasn't just fear of the law. It was the fear of how deep this went. They had been acting like they had the power to seize property, to force people into paying bogus fines. But now that the sheriff's department was on the case, they were seeing that it was all a house of cards ready to collapse. Ramirez came over, his voice low and measured. It's over for both of you. You're facing charges for impersonating law enforcement, fraud, and extortion. But if you help us bring down Whitaker, it could go easier on you. She's the one who's been running the whole show. David's head dropped, and I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes. He wasn't fully absolved, but I could tell he didn't want to be part of the scam anymore. Clipboard guy, on the other hand, just glared at the ground, unwilling to look up. I don't want anything to do with her, David finally said. I just wanted to get out of this alive. I gave him a nod. Then you'd better start talking. Help us take her down. The next few minutes were a blur as Ramirez and his deputies took statements and continued gathering evidence. The younger enforcer, David, seemed like he was ready to turn on Karen Whitaker completely. The clipboard guy, however, looked like he was still considering his options, trying to figure out how he could minimize his own punishment. The truth was coming out, and it wouldn't be long before Karen Whitaker realized her entire operation was about to be exposed. With the fake enforcers arrested and providing the crucial information about Karen Whitaker's involvement, the sheriff's department immediately shifted gears. It was time to take down the scam at its root. I stayed close to Ramirez as he coordinated with his team. We've got a lot of work ahead, he said, his voice focused and calm. We're going to hit the warehouse and gather everything we can. If she's been running this operation like we think, she won't have any way out. I watched as the deputies loaded up the evidence, including the fraudulent documents, the fake HOA forms, and even a list of names, likely other targets or victims of the scam. The thought of how many people had been bullied and threatened by this operation made my blood boil. These weren't just papers. These were livelihoods that had been toyed with and threatened under the guise of authority. Mike, I need you to come with me, Ramirez said, looking up from his paperwork. We're going to the warehouse. We've got enough intel to execute a search warrant. If we're lucky, we might catch Whitaker there. Without hesitation, I followed him. We piled into the sheriff's cruiser, and I could feel the energy shifting into something more serious. This wasn't just a case of scamming a few people. It was a full-blown operation, and we were about to shut it down. As we pulled up to the warehouse, the place looked deserted from the outside, unmarked, quiet, and hidden behind a line of trees. It could have easily been mistaken for an abandoned building, but I knew better. This was the heart of the operation. Ramirez signaled for his deputies to surround the building, and I moved into position with him. It didn't take long before the team was inside, systematically searching the place. I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. The walls that Karen Whitaker had built around her fraudulent empire were starting to crumble. Let's move, Ramirez said, leading the way into the building. We're going to find everything we need to bring her down. We moved through the dark, cold warehouse, the sound of footsteps echoing off the walls. My instincts were sharp as ever, keeping me alert for anything out of place. But all I could see were file cabinets, boxes of documents, and old computers. As we rounded a corner, I saw the first sign of the depth of her operation, a row of binders, each labeled with the names of people she had targeted. Fines, false accusations, and threats of eviction, all meticulously documented. As the search continued, the deputies found even more disturbing things: forged signatures, fake property transfer forms, and a collection of intimidating letters that had been sent to people all over the area. It was clear now. Karen Whitaker had been operating this scam for far longer than we had suspected. "We've got everything we need," Ramirez said, holding up a stack of documents. "And this is enough to bring her down. She's not going to get away with it." I stood there, watching the deputies gather the final pieces of evidence. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, knowing that this chapter of intimidation and fraud was finally coming to an end. But I knew this wasn't over yet. Karen Whitaker hadn't been caught, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. "Let's get her," I said, my voice steady with resolve. "We're not letting her run any longer." The tension was palpable as the team continued to sift through the warehouse, uncovering more evidence of Karen Whitaker's scam. I could feel the weight of it all. This wasn't just about the money she had stolen or the lives she had tried to ruin. It was about justice. And it was time for Karen to face the consequences. "Mike, it's time," Ramirez said, glancing up from a stack of documents. He'd been on the phone for the past few minutes, likely coordinating the arrest with his team. "We've got her location. Karen Whitaker's holed up at a house just outside town. We've got the warrant, and we're moving in now." The sense of finality hit me all at once. After everything she had done, after everything we had uncovered, it was time to bring her in. I wasn't about to let someone like Karen Whitaker slip through the cracks. She had caused enough damage, and now she was about to answer for it. I climbed into the sheriff's cruiser with Ramirez, and the drive to Karen's house felt like the longest few minutes of my life. As we approached her property, I couldn't help but notice the contrast between the outside world and what had been happening behind closed doors. This was someone who thought she could get away with manipulating entire neighborhoods, using fear and fraud as her weapons. When we pulled up, it was eerily quiet. The house was a large, well-maintained place, tucked away behind a tall gate. But this was no time for hesitation. Ramirez signaled to his deputies to surround the property, and we all moved in. I could see Karen through the windows, pacing back and forth. She hadn't seen us coming, and the surprise was on our side. Ramirez knocked on the door, his voice calm but firm. "Karen Whitaker, you're under arrest for fraud, impersonating law enforcement, and conspiracy to commit extortion." The door swung open almost immediately, and there she was, Karen Whitaker, looking every bit the part of the arrogant, self-assured fraudster she was. But now there was no confidence in her posture. Her shoulders slumped, and her eyes widened as she saw the law closing in on her. She stepped back, clearly startled, but it was too late. Her empire had collapsed. "You can't do this," Karen tried to say, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything wrong. You don't understand." Ramirez stepped forward, his tone unwavering. "We understand more than you think. You're under arrest for attempting to steal property, defraud people, and impersonate law enforcement. This is over." As the deputies moved in to cuff her, I could see the fight draining from her. She had been used to getting her way for so long that I think she had genuinely believed she could keep pushing people around without consequence. But now she was paying the price for everything she had done. Karen Whitaker was escorted to one of the cruisers, her head held low in defeat. As she was driven away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication wash over me. It wasn't just about stopping her, it was about making sure this kind of abuse of power never happened again. As Karen Whitaker was driven away in the back of a patrol car, I stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. The rush of adrenaline from the past few days had finally begun to subside, replaced by a quiet sense of victory. We had exposed the fraud, confronted the fake enforcers, and brought down the mastermind behind it all. The weight of knowing we had put an end to her scam was almost overwhelming in the best way. Ramirez came over, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's over, Mike. We've got everything we need to make sure she faces every charge. This whole operation is done for. No more intimidation, no more fake fines or property grabs. It's all coming to an end." I nodded, still taking in the reality of it all. "It feels good to see it all come together, but I'm glad it's finally done. People like Karen shouldn't be able to get away with this. It's not just about the money, it's about how many people she hurt, how many lives she tried to control." "You're right about that," Ramirez agreed. "She's been scamming people for far too long. The legal action's already underway. The DA's office is filing the paperwork, and she's facing multiple charges: fraud, conspiracy, impersonating law enforcement, and theft. She'll be in court soon, and she's not going to walk away from this." I looked over at Paul, who had come over to stand beside me. He was watching the scene unfold with a relieved look on his face. It was clear that the tension he had been carrying for days had finally lifted. "Mike, I don't know what to say," Paul said, his voice full of gratitude. "If you hadn't stepped in, I don't know what would have happened. I don't know how she thought she could get away with this, but I'm glad she's not going to hurt anyone else." I clapped him on the shoulder. "You don't have to thank me. It's what neighbors do, look out for each other. And besides, it wasn't just about you. It was about stopping her from doing this to anyone else. No one should have to deal with that kind of intimidation." As the deputies packed up the last of the evidence, Ramirez turned to me. "Mike, I've been in law enforcement long enough to know when someone goes above and beyond. You didn't just protect your neighbor, you made sure this whole operation got shut down. You should be proud of what you did here." I didn't say anything for a moment. It wasn't about the praise or recognition. It was about knowing that justice had been served, that Karen Whitaker wouldn't be able to harm anyone else, and that the community could finally breathe easy again. "Let's make sure it stays that way," I said, looking toward the horizon. "Let's make sure no one ever tries this again."